Welcome back, everybody, for episode 3 of Birds and Boots. And I'm so delighted to be joined today by Eagles coach Mark Steffens. Mark Steffens, how are you today?
I'm great, Donnie. Doing well. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. Thanks
Good.
so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. One of our main goals this summer, as you know already, is to connect with former and current players and coaches. And we're so happy to have you on. So, again, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
So let's
My
go
pleasure.
back to your stomping grounds, Huntington, New York, and then playing for King's College for your soccer career. Playing wise, what made you, or what was a point in your life when you realized that that was something you wanted to do in college?
Uh, well, it's really interesting. Huntington was just for a few years, and then we moved to Syosset. My dad was a pastor. Um, I back then, in the 50s and 60s, I hate to say that, but that's where it was. There was very little soccer. Long Island was kind of a hotbed for it. So I was a baseball player, and that was my dream, to be a Major League Baseball player. And I just picked up soccer with a friend and started kicking the ball around. And then that ended up being the sport I ended up being better in. And from there, my dad really pushed me to go to a Christian college. So I went to King's College, which was kind of upstate New York a little bit. And I went there, and they had a great soccer team because they had a connection with a missionary school in Africa, in Kenya, called the Rift Valley Academy.
Oh, wow.
So basically half of our team were, Africans, even though, they're missionary kids. So Americans slash grew up in Africa. So they were really talented. And I think I learned more there than ever anywhere else as a player. And that's where I played 4 years there, and then very fortunate to sign with the New York Apollos after my baseball. Again, I was still hoping to go baseball. And then after my last baseball game, back then you couldn't sign professionally and play another sport in college.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't feel I could do that to my teammates in baseball and my coach. So after my last baseball game, I signed with the New York Apollo and started playing with them. And after a while, I found out, I'm really not as good as most of these guys. Maybe I should go into coaching, because right now I'm on the bench and only played a few games for a couple of years. And again, learned a lot there. Learned probably from the coaches. I had a guy that played on the Greek Olympic team, a national team, that I learned a lot from. And so it was a great experience. I just didn't play a lot,
Right.
So just kind of went into coaching after that.
You mentioned the Greek Olympic team, Greek national team. It's funny, I'm actually half Greek.
Wow.
So hearing that, what could you tell me that player's name?
Yeah. It was a coach. He was
Okay.
Nick Cambolis.
Okay.
Don't forget, it was in the dark ages, so you'd have to look him up online. But Nick Cambolis was a fantastic guy. I really got to know him well. He brought over a lot of Greek players, Christopheridis, and I can't even remember all the names. Don't forget, this was a long time ago, but they were really good, and I didn't deserve to be playing over them. So I figured, let's make this a learning experience, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's what I did, and tried to pick Cambolis's, the coach's, brain as much as possible, and that's kind of what I do. I love analyzing things, so picked his brain, picked a lot of the players' brains, and watched them and learned from those guys quite a bit.
It's so funny. We always say that sports is such a small world, and having the connection with Greeks, we always joke, us Greeks, that we're all related somehow. So who knows? That may be a distant relative. That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So when you mentioned coaching, you said that it really hit you while you were a player, but did you ever see yourself in this position that you are now, having such a illustrious resume when it came to coaching soccer?
Well, I'm not sure it's an illustrious resume, but it's a long one. Let's put it that way. No, I mean, obviously not. I mean, sports was my thing growing up, so I played every sport all the time. My mom would always yell at me, "It's getting dark, come in." But, we were in the A thing. We were playing kickball back then more than soccer.
Right.
But yeah, I played everything, so I loved the game. But I never saw myself as a coach back then. I don't think anyone does. But when I was playing like baseball out of college and soccer and things, people always would pick me to kind of run the team if it was like a pickup team and stuff. And
Hmm.
it just, right out of college, even when I was playing, I loved the game so much. I wanted to be around it. I just started coaching high school soccer just because I enjoyed it. But again, never thought it would go anywhere but high school soccer. But I had a mentor on Long Island that was a super, super guy, Chris Sweeney.
Hmm.
And he told me, he said, whether you're going to do this for, a few years or not, I would start going for your national licenses. So right away, I started going for my licenses and end up getting my national A lot earlier than most people did, just because he told me to do that. And I looked up to this guy, and right there, this guy connected me with a Dutch connection on Long Island,
Hmm.
and where I grew up and where I was coaching. And it was a couple of the New York Cosmos players years and years ago that started a Dutch school, just called, everybody knows the name now, it's called Dutch Total Soccer School. And so I was one of about a dozen coaches on Long Island that got plugged into that. And we all had the opportunity to go overseas. Nobody did, but I was like, what, are they crazy? I'm taking this opportunity. So I was the only one of that group to go over to Holland and spend time with some of the top coaches over there. And again, I learned so much from these guys. One guy is named Fapa Dahan, who is like an icon over there. Um, he's about 75. I think he's still coaching.
Wow.
So he coached their U23 national team. But yeah, that was kind of my start into soccer. Was this guy Chris Sweeney just pushed me in it, and I admired him and I looked up to him. And I think because of his influence in my life, um, I really wanted to get into coaching more.
That is such a fantastic story. And I wish that more people took advantage of going overseas just for anything, for work, for school. It sounded amazing.
I was a kid in a candy store. I mean, I was taking notes. I was sitting down with this guy. And when I tell people that really are into the game that who I was sitting down with one-on-one, they're like, no way. I was like, I'm telling you, I don't know how it happened. And I really believe it was a God thing, because all through my career in soccer, I don't believe I deserved any where I was I coached in the MISL, the old MISL that was huge. And I coached these guys that were playing in the NASL. Most of them played for their national team. I was an assistant coach.
Hmm.
But I remember sitting there at like 31 going like, what am I doing coaching guys my age, that are played for their national team? One name, it probably sounds like I'm name dropping, but this is just the truth. Ricky Davis, who most people don't remember, but he captained our national team for like maybe 7-8 years,
Wow.
played in the old NASL for the Cosmos. So because he was in New York with the Cosmos, he signed with us. That was called the New York Arrows,
Hmm.
and then the New York Express. So, I started my pro coaching career in the indoor game, and that kind of just developed. But I mean, I agree with you. Going overseas is just an amazing thing. You can learn so much. It's a great experience. Yeah, I they some of those trips. I made a few trips over there just to be with Fapa,
Hmm.
and just the best soccer experiences in my life as a student. Yeah.
Have you been able to go to any other countries when it comes to soccer or anything like that?
I've been with the Eagles. I've been all over the world,
True.
with our players and mostly coaching our players in mission trips. But every time I went, I would try to get with a good coach and pick his brain or something like that. But yeah, I've been to many African countries, been to Europe, been to Southeast Asia. Yeah, we took our team to great trip to Medellin, Colombia. But yeah, I could go on and on about that. But we've been all over the world, and it's been fantastic experiences every time.
Staying on the same page with coaching, whether it was in New York or with the Eagles, what are some of the most satisfying moments as a coach? I know that's a broad question, but that come to mind when you think of your time.
Yeah, um, that is a hard question because I know what people would want to hear, and they would want to hear, we won a few national championships. And, it's funny, like after we won our first national championship, I sat on the bench when the team ran over to our crowd and was celebrating. I just sat there with our GM going like, wow, this is awesome. But you know what? It's really empty compared to investing in the lives of the young men. And that's what I loved about my years. And I'm still with the Eagles part-time, but I love my years with the Eagles because I had an opportunity to have coffee with, 300 young guys. And I love coffee, obviously, but, lunch, had them over my house and on, a lot of one-on-one meetings, a lot of small group meetings and team meetings that I wouldn't change the relationships for anything in the world. I'd take the championships and give them back. If someone said, you want your championships or your relationships you still have with the guys, and there's nothing better than having strong relationships with your players. And I've really enjoyed that part of it more than anything.
How did you come to find the Eagles job when you were first hired?
Yeah, I went, Brian Davidson, who started started the franchise, the organization in Los Angeles with our team there, the Seahorses. He heard I was coaching in the MLS in the MISL in the indoor, and he was doing something with analytical stuff in the indoor, and he heard that I was a Christian, and so he contacted me and said I was still able to play back then. I was like 36 or something, and he said, how about come to Europe with us for World Cup 1990, and you can play and be my assistant. And I was like, yeah, I don't think so, I'm so busy here. And he's a really good recruiter, Brian, and that's how he started the organization. But he got me to go. My wife and I went. We went to Czech and Poland and Germany, and ended up 1990 at the World Cup in Italy. And I had some friends that Tony Meola was the goalkeeper. I had worked with him, so it was. And then Joe Macknick was the goalkeeper coach. Actually, you pronounce it Macknick, and I had coached with him in the indoor. So I was able to get there and watch those guys and talk to those guys, and so that was pretty cool. That was how I first found out about the Charlotte Eagles. Well, they weren't the Charlotte Eagles at the time; they were the LA Seahorses. Then the next year, Brian Davidson asked me to be on the steering committee of where the next office would be planted. And so we were supposed to go to Charlotte, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. And when I flew down to Charlotte, we spent 3 or 4 days talking to people down there, and we were in a prayer session. And after the prayer session, we looked at each other and said, do we really have to go to Baltimore and Philadelphia? I think this is it. And he was like, yeah, or one of us, I can't remember who said, Wafa was like, yeah, this is it. We need to be here. And so that's how the Charlotte office started. But then I just went on a couple of tours with them and was so involved with what I was doing soccer-wise back, on Long Island, that he had contacted me almost every year to come to Charlotte. And finally in 96, I went down and just watched a game or two and kind of looked at the organization. And then in 97 is when my wife stayed on Long Island with our 3 daughters. And then I came down to Charlotte and coached the team for the first year. And it was very difficult for 6 months. We, had to commute and didn't see my family that much, but they came down and fell in love with Charlotte as well. My wife and our daughters, and I did. And so we made a permanent move in 98. And so the rest is history, 18 years coaching the USL team. Pretty amazing. I loved every minute.
Pretty easy to fall in love with Charlotte, right?
It is. It's a great city. It's a great city. Yeah.
You mentioned how you value your relationships with your players, and for me, I admire that. And I actually got to sit on a Zoom call yesterday, and I heard you say that, was it about every year you had at least 1 or 2 players come to know the Lord?
You were on that?
I was, yeah. I was taking notes, so you didn't hear me at all, but
wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, every year, probably more than that. Probably 2 or 3 guys. Our rule was kind of everybody had to be a believer, and so there was always room for 1 or 2 seekers. So we allowed that. But there was a number of guys who thought, maybe they raised their hand at a Billy Graham crusade, 15 years ago and thought they were a Christian, or 10 years ago. So every year, 2, 3, sometimes 4 guys came to Christ, and man, what a blessing and what an encouragement. I remember one year there, we had a discipleship at a church we would take our guys to. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I think the second week of training, and the pastor invited, after about a 2-hour session of going through the foundations of the faith, he asked if anybody, and this wasn't just our team, this was other people from the church, so probably about 75 people. And he asked if anybody wanted to accept Christ, and 3 of our guys stand up. I'm shocked, like, okay, so 1 week in a few meetings, and man, that was, and then unfortunately one guy didn't even keep. He was a trialist, but 3 of them, 2 of them we did keep, and I stay in touch with those guys all the time. So one of them's still with the Eagles, by the way.
Which one would that be?
That's Drew Yates.
Drew Yates. Yes, I know Drew. That's awesome.
Yeah.
How about that? What were some of those conversations like initially when they accepted the Lord, and when you were someone that they could have looked up to as a coach and as a mentor, if that?
Well, again, I don't know if I was a mentor. I just tried to live my life, as God called me to, and try to invest in the men the best I could with Scripture. I mean, what else is better, right?
Right.
So Scripture was a big part of our sports ministry training, obviously, and it was, those conversations were, there were tears of joy and from both sides. And it's almost indescribable when those guys come to Christ, when, you're just using a game of soccer as our platform, and we love the game and they love the game, and they come because of the game, and okay, it's a Christian team, I can handle that, some of the seekers. And then all of a sudden they go like, no, I need Jesus, I need Jesus. And it's just mind blowing to me. And again, I just think God, prepared me for this mission totally, without me having any of the right ability. It's just God using a simple person to work through, and he prepared me all along the way, because again, I had no desire to do it in the beginning, and I didn't have the ability, the coaching ability to do it. I didn't have the background to do it. I just tried to be obedient to his call, and he just put me in the right place at the right time, I think, just preparing me. And then when I came down to Charlotte is when I figured out, okay, now I know why all these other things happened, because he was preparing me for ministry, even though I tried to do some ministry with the non-Christian teams. It's just, you have to be a little bit undercover, and a little quiet when you do it. But I mean, I did that. I coached a year and a half in Pittsburgh, and I had to do the same thing there. I couldn't say a lot about my faith, but I did a lot more when I was one-on-one with players. So,
how comforting was that when you made that switch to Charlotte? I know you mentioned, starting with Charlotte back in the 90s, but from Pittsburgh to Charlotte, what was that weight like taken off your shoulders where you can finally proclaim how you are as a believer?
well, it was the opposite. I started in Charlotte, and then when Charlotte went to the PDL, the lower level, which was not professional, that's when I got a call from the Pittsburgh Riverhounds. They were looking
Right.
for a coach. And I really, again, I didn't want to do it in the beginning, but through my wife and I praying about it, we decided to take the challenge, and went up there for a year and a half and had a great experience. Although I got released my second year. We had a slow start, but still learned a ton. And then coming back to Charlotte was really a breath of fresh air. Although, hey, don't get me wrong, I loved my relationships up there. I mean, I built some really strong relationships. A few guys kind of rededicated their lives to the Lord or made a commitment. I'm not really sure. I still stay in touch with a number of those guys from Pittsburgh. The assistant coach had me do a Zoom meeting with he's now with Cincinnati MLS Youth Club. He had me do a big Zoom meeting on leadership for the Cincinnati U15s and U17s. So we had about 60 people. And again, he allowed me to share my testimony. So I enjoyed my time there. But it was, back with the Eagles, of course, you can relax and not worry about getting fired when you share your faith.
Breath of fresh air, indeed.
No question. I mean, I bleed Charlotte Eagles colors. I've been with them so long, and just love the organization. Yeah.
That's amazing. When you talk about your faith journey and your testimony, what has that been like for you as a man growing up and now at this point where you're with an organization, but looking back further into your high school, college, and early coaching years, what was that like with your faith journey?
Yeah, that was, it was people always say like that have been brought up in the church say, oh, I have a boring testimony because I was brought up in the church all my life and stuff. So for me, it's been great. I loved growing up in it, but I rebelled big time because playing baseball, playing soccer, my dad would not, my dad's in heaven right now, but he would not let me play. And, a lot of those things are on Sundays, would not let me play until church was over. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the doubleheaders in baseball in the summer leagues would start at 11 o'clock in the morning, and our church service started at 11. So, and sometimes 12 and 1 the games would start. So my mom would be driving me to a game. I'm throwing on my uniform, soccer too. I'm throwing on a uniform in the back seat. I get there. My coach is mad at me. My teammates are mad at me. And I'm mad at my dad, So, so that was it. It made me rebel for quite a bit because I was so passionate about baseball and soccer growing up. It wasn't until really my first year in college that the Lord got a hold of my heart, and I made my faith my own. I was struggling in school and everything I was doing because I was so rebellious because of not being able to be myself during those formative years, kind of 16 through 15 through 18, maybe 14 through 18. And I didn't do anything crazy, but just kind of bucked everything in school and just enjoyed myself too much. And and then my baseball coach at the end of my freshman year came into the dormitory, knew I was struggling in different ways, and he sat down with me and he spent 2 hours talking to me and about really just totally committing my life to Christ. And it's like, I know all that stuff, but man, he prayed with me at the end, and he was another very influential guy in my life. His name was Hal Smith. He was the dean of men also, so he was Dean Smith to us, which, like the Dean Smith of Chapel
Right.
Hill, who coached for years basketball, the Hall of Famer.
Yep.
So Dean Smith was, the other Dean Smith was very, very influential in my life as well. Of course, my parents were. I didn't realize it at the time, but I mean, yeah, they were the most influential. But that's when I really dedicated my heart to the Lord, and I think it was no looking back after when I was about 19 years old.
So now that you mentioned that, what are some of the similarities you see in your players that you coached with the Eagles during your main time and part time now, when you see that struggle that some people are going through that you may not realize until you actually sit down and talk with them?
Yeah, and that's that's a common thing that happened more than multiple, like hundreds probably of times, sitting down with somebody, and it takes a while for them to, I think, really unload what they're feeling, until they had to find out first that I really cared about them, and then they would, a number of them would open up and be more transparent. And that was one of the things we pushed a lot with the Eagles, is like, like, we all make mistakes. Be open so we can communicate about it, so we can get through this together, so we can grow together. And so there were many talks like that. And, it's nothing complicated. It's just get in the Word, get in the Word of God. It's so powerful. And as long as, and that, I mean, again, I'm a simple guy. It's just like, hey, I don't have all these complicated formulas. I just say, get in the Word and let me get in the Word with you. Here's where you go. Here's what we can work on. Let's pray about it. I mean, that's what we did with, a lot of our players. I had help. I had some assistant coaches that were incredible. That, if and that were younger. So if there was an issue that I felt like they needed to speak to, Steve Shack is one of them. Played in the MLS, played for the Eagles, and that was my assistant coach for 8 or 9 years, 10 years, I don't remember, but he was amazing. I mean, he'll tell you he grew a lot with the Eagles, but he was my guy. I would sick on the younger guys that had some problems that he went through, and he was so good with them. So, it wasn't a one-man show by any stretch of the imagination. It was a group of us. I had a strong leadership group as a coach. I always like to pick maybe 5 to 7 guys that are veterans, that are leaders, and I bring them into a leadership group with the coaching staff, and we talk through all of the issues. They get to feel the pulse of the players even better than we, a coaching staff would do. And so we had many meetings on those players, and sometimes I had those players go, hey, go to this guy. I know he's struggling with X, just invest in him. And so we kind of had this chain going down of guys investing, veterans investing in the younger guys. And it was always very, very successful, I thought, so it was a group of us. There was an army that were working with these young guys. And you have to do that, you have to do that. And God, God, and we're just the tools, and God does all the work. And he has blessed this organization for many, many years.
Couldn't have said it better. One thing that I noticed too as well, you are an ordained minister, correct?
I was. I guess I am. I don't know. I had, my dad's a pastor, my brother's a pastor. I had planned to go into the ministry quite a few years ago. So my dad went through the ordination process with me. I spoke a number of times in the church that he pastored, and I just, it just felt like it wasn't my calling after a while. And I just kept getting pushed to the sports side of things. And, but I think it was good for me. But yeah, I mean, I don't consider myself an ordained pastor because I'm not a behind the pulpit preacher. That's not who I am. I don't have a talent for that whatsoever. So yeah, it's just a technicality, I'd say.
Gotcha. Gotcha. How was that for you as a kid growing up, seeing your dad in that kind of light?
Yeah, interesting, because it put a lot of pressure on his children, because he was big into like, hey, this is who I am. This is my reputation. If
Hmm.
you do something wrong, it looks bad on me. So there was always that type thing. So he was pretty strict. He was German. My
Okay.
mom's Italian, so my dad was pretty strict with us growing up. I'll tell you one quick story. I was probably about 10 years old, and I was in the back row talking with a friend, just whispering. And my dad, and we probably had about 200 people in our church. It wasn't a big church. But my dad, when he would snap his fingers, I would hear that in the back. And that means, be quiet, Mark. Well, he did that this Sunday, but I guess I was a little bit, brain dead and didn't listen to that too well. And I kept talking a little bit. And then he goes, and Mark, in the middle of his sermon, Mark, would you come up here for a minute, please? I was like, oh, no.
Oh
I
no.
walked up in the front, and the two chairs behind my dad that are facing the audience, I had to sit in one of them. He says, sit down there. And so I'm 10 years old, looking at the audience, beet red, and I had never talked again in church. Even to this day, I won't say a word in church. So do I suggest that for other people? No. But other pastors, don't do that to your kids. But it worked with me, and it's a different day and age. But yeah, that was embarrassing.
That is one of the best church stories I think I may have ever heard.
Yeah. Oh man, it still rubs me wrong to this day.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
That's that's amazing. That's amazing. But I know that you mentioned too how you said that your coach Dean Smith in college was a mentor to you, and you didn't realize at that point, I guess, how influential your parents were. But now being a parent yourself and seeing that relation to how your dad was, do you see any similarities with that and trying to just be strict, but also that kind of tough love mentality?
Yeah, they're as they say, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. Well,
Right.
but with my dad, I knew he loved me. I loved him. He's a great man, but he was really strict. And again, I think over the years things have slipped in that way. I think that's a little bit part of the problem, the family problem we're having in our country. I think it's a large part of the problem, but the discipline was different. So I didn't want to copy the discipline side of things totally, but I did like that he was fair to me. Okay, so even though I felt it wasn't fair at the time, not playing every minute of every game and things like that. When I look back, I needed what he put me through, and again, he didn't beat me. He didn't put me through a ton of stuff, but I look back and I see what a great example he was for me, and how he loved the Lord, and how generous he was with the little few dollars he had growing up, and how much, yeah, he just loved people. And so my motto as a coach, even from the beginning, was firm but fair. And I think I got that from my dad. And so you have to be firm, but if you're not fair, there's an expression I've used for years. I got it from Josh McDowell. I heard him say this a long time ago, and I don't know if I read it or heard him on a tape. He said, rules without relationship equal rebellion. I think it's a pretty common saying that goes around now, but I really believe in that. So I use that in my coaching career quite a bit, that there's guidelines. I don't even like to call them rules, but the 3 R's worked back then, right? So the guidelines you set, if there's no relationship, there's going to be some kind of rebellion. And so that's what I practice now. I practice that as a parent. I practice that as a coach. I want to be so relational with my guys that they know I love them. And so if there's boundaries that we have to go like, hey, you broke that boundary, so you need to sit this game out or whatever it is, they understand like, hey, he cares. He's doing it for my good. He cares about me. So rules without relationship equal rebellion. That's a big motto of mine I've stole from Josh McDowell.
I like that a lot. You mentioned firm but fair, and you mentioned your dad's story of when he was a pastor and had you sit in front of the audience. Do you have any firm or fair stories as a coach where you may sit back and laugh, now, but during the time you were firm, but again, fair as well?
Well, there's a few times that I was firm and not fair. I can tell you that. For sure, my old nature got in the way. I won't tell you those stories. They're pretty embarrassing. Firm but fair. Well, yeah, I think there's many times that I try to use situations as a teaching moment in the game, or in training mostly. I think training is more of the greenhouse that a coach can really nourish their players and give them teaching moments. The game's a test, and so as a coach, you want to do all your shaping and molding in the training sessions. And so if there's spats going on or somebody comes in hard, you need to stop, or not maybe stop, but somewhere along the day, you need to go over what that was and why that's not one of our core values. We would always put a bunch of core values, or 4 or 5 or 6 every year with our team, and like, hey, others focus is one of them we had almost every year. Like, hey, when you took that guy out intentionally, that was not others focus. Do you think it was? And no, coach, that wasn't. And so we would always have our players meet together after they had a tough situation. But there was many situations I had to pull a guy out of training because, I thought he was overdoing it or throwing vulgarity around or something. And then we would sit and talk about it after training. So yeah, there was many of those scenarios. There were times I pulled guys out of games for getting yellow cards because of, if it was a fair yellow card of just a hard tackle, I understand that. But when someone's it looks like they're trying to hurt somebody, or what I really didn't like was dissent to the referee. Like, that was one thing we said, if you get a yellow card for dissent for the referee, you're coming out of that game, and then we'll decide how bad it was. So I've done that. I did that to one player, his first game for us. He didn't get the message right away, sort of. And I subbed him in the second half, and I pulled him out with like 15 minutes to go. So that didn't set too well with him, but I think it was definitely firm, but it was fair, because he knew the boundaries and he didn't abide by them. Another player during a training session was arguing with me about a call. They're so competitive. They always argue with you, or say, hey, coach, I didn't disagree with that. Anyway, he kept arguing with me, and I called him over. It was a little small-sided game we were playing. I called him over to the sideline, and he was saying that was the wrong call. So I threw the whistle at him, and I said, okay, you call it from here on out. And then he caught the whistle, walked over. It was like 10 feet away. He walked over to me, handed the whistle back, and said, I'm sorry, coach. You're right. So little things like that. There's a million of them. I can't remember them all, but I tried to be as fair as I could. And like I said, there are times I blew it. I mean, for sure, I'm not perfect. I'm human, and I made many mistakes. But you try to learn from them and try to grow from them. And that's why I had a leadership team. I actually called that a LAG group, a leadership accountability group. So I had the players hold me accountable for the things that I said or did. assistant coaches and the leaders, I wanted to know if, and they told me, hey, coach, I don't think, this should have happened. And I want to grow. You're always growing. You never stop growing. So, I was going to throw one firm but not fair, but we don't need to do that.
Fair enough. You mentioned you may not remember all of them, as you said, but being that I was on that call yesterday going through all of the alumni lists, your memory is fantastic. I mean, there were teams from the 90s and you were reciting them like they were just here in 2019. When did you realize your memory was so good with things like that?
Yeah, I think it's just because, I love the guys and and just cared about them so much, and spent not just the season, but a lot of the off seasons with them and going out with them. And and it is amazing because being a center back most of my career, all the headers I took, I don't know how I can remember anything nowadays. My wife calls it a selective memory. So I do not have the same memory I had years ago for sure. But I do remember. I seriously think I remember every player that ever played for me. If the name comes by me, I would I'll say oh yeah, that guy didn't play for us in 1997. I remember that probably more than picking the players out of thin air. But
that's
always a great group of guys. I was blessed.
That's fantastic. Coach, it's been phenomenal being able to hear your heart and hear your stories. I can't thank you enough, and I'm sure those that are listening and watching are thinking the same thing. But one final question for you to kind of tie things up. If someone approached you and asked you what the Charlotte Eagles meant to you and what their mission was, in so many words, what would you tell that person?
Yeah, I would say we just use soccer as our platform or our vehicle to have an opportunity to point people to Christ, men's and women's. I work with the women's team 1 year as well. And that's all soccer is. It's a great game. But the purpose of the mission is to invest in young people to become leaders, to become obviously Christian leaders, and to go out and make an impact in the world. I'll steal a phrase from Joe Ehrman in his book, and he calls it a men built for others. I mean, it could be women built for others too, but we're trying to grow men for the Great Commission to go out, be solid Christians in their, solid for the men's team, solid husbands and solid fathers, solid friends, solid employers or employees, and just make an impact for Christ around the world. And that's what the Charlotte Eagles ministry is all about, just growing young men and women in their faith and helping them reach out to the rest of the world. It's a crazy world we live in, and we need more men and women on fire for God and loving Jesus and loving others.
It's comforting to know that you feel that way, Coach. So again, thank you. Thank you for all the time, and I hope you continue to stay safe. And there will be a point where we get to convene in person and all this stuff goes away at some point, right?
Great. I look forward to meeting you, Donnie, and it's my pleasure.
Of course. Thank you again.
You're welcome.